Gather round and welcome back to another edition of Todd Talks College Football. That's right, folks. We are into 5 thoughts on Week 13 in college football, and what an exciting weekend we had. We saw 5 teams in the top 25 fall out and lose their games. We saw some shakeup. We saw some clarity on where we're going to go with the playoffs. So we saw all of that this weekend and much, much more. So let's break down the 5 thoughts on week number 13 in college football. Thought 1 on Week 13 in college football. Let's start out in Eugene, Oregon. That's right, in Eugene, Oregon, at Autzen Stadium, we had the biggest game of the day yesterday. That's right, USC Trojans traveled to face the Oregon Ducks, and this was a playoff eliminator game, folks. If you didn't know it, maybe not a complete eliminator for Oregon, but definitely for USC. And Oregon ended up winning this football game 42-27. Let's get into some of the breakdown on what happened out here. Oregon absolutely played a really fantastic football game in all facets of the game. We'll start with that. I mean, they really handled USC in multiple ways and kept the pressure on USC to try to score, and USC just, they made mistakes and they couldn't keep up with the scoring. So 42 points for Oregon in this football game is absolutely tremendous. Oregon did hold Lemon to 34 total yards, receiving yards, which is an absolute masterpiece for, shutting down Makai Lemon there for USC. They did give up to Hines and Lane. Hines had 141 yards. Lane had 108 yards receiving, both for the Trojans. So, they kind of shut Lemon down, but they gave up some passes to Hines and to Lane there. Dante Moore had 257 yards, 2 TDs in this game, passing the football, so he had a really efficient football game overall. The Ducks rushed for 179 yards against this, I don't want to say poorish USC defense overall, but definitely defense that has been giving up rushing yards. They gave up over 300 to Notre Dame, so they've actually did pretty well considering, where they were against Notre Dame to what they did here against the Oregon Ducks at 179. But the bottom line here at the end of the day is Oregon just made the plays, kept stretching it out. Every time USC got back within a score, Oregon would figure out a way to stretch this thing back out to 2 scores. And the one thing I really was questioning there, USC cut this thing to 35-27 in the fourth quarter. And I'm not exactly sure why, but USC decided to go for 2 at this point. At this point, they were down 8. They kicked the extra point. They could make this a 7-point football game, but instead they decided to go for 2. They didn't make it, which then put it at 35-27. I'm not really sure exactly what the thinking was on that. I guess maybe, you steal a free point, but you still got to score a touchdown and kick the extra point to win the game anyway. So I guess, I don't know. I guess I would have probably tied, or kicked the extra point to get it down to 7 instead of 8. It didn't really matter. The Ducks came back and had a big play and put this thing to 42-27 and kind of sealed the deal. So overall, again, a very entertaining football game. I think the Ducks had one of their most dominant performances of the year offensively, at least in the recent weeks, against a really good, solid USC team that is not going to make the playoffs now with this loss here. But overall, I think, USC has shown a lot of improvement, and, they're going to probably beat UCLA next week, finish up at 9-3, and just be on the outside looking in at the playoff position from that point. So, anyways, Oregon 42, USC 27. Thought 2 on Week 13 in college football. Let's go down to Atlanta, and we saw the Pitt Panthers dismantle the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets yesterday, 42-28. And this game started out with a barrage of points here for Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh went down, and in the first 20 minutes of this football game, they were up 28-0, really putting Georgia Tech and Haynes King behind the 8 ball there. Now, Georgia Tech ended up fighting and clawing their way back into this football game. They ended up cutting this thing to 28-14. Third quarter, they got a drive here, 10 plays, 75 yards. They're moving the ball just absolutely perfect in the first drive of the second half. This could have cut the game to 28-21, which would have been, considering they started out at 28-0, it would have been a great potential comeback here. Unfortunately, Haynes King throws the interception. Pitt runs it back 100 yards for a touchdown, which ends up putting this game at 35 to 14 at that point. So they missed that big opportunity. Yeah, 35. It was 28 to 14. They were going in to score to make it 28-21. They throw the pick six. They make it 38 to 14. So really a 2-touchdown swing potentially there. And at that point, they just can't get back in the game. Haynes King overall, he had 330 plus total yards throwing and rushing the football. He did a pretty good, performance in terms of his ability. The defense couldn't stop him. I mean, even when they got this thing to 35-14, they did end up scoring, making it 35-21. Again, potentially cutting this thing down and down and down, but unfortunately they couldn't stop the big run, and Turner gassed them for like a 40-yard TD to take it to 42-21 at that point. Speaking of Turner, he had 201 yards rushing in this game for Pittsburgh. Absolutely tremendous performance for him, rushing the football. So overall here, Georgia Tech can't hang on and keep their playoff hopes alive. They do play Georgia this coming week, so we'll see if they can fix some of the issues. And this is a big-time rivalry game between Georgia and Georgia Tech. They're playing it there in Atlanta at the Mercedes-Benz Dome. So can Georgia Tech finish off this season and end up at 10-2? And if they could, there is still a potential that they could get into the playoffs, and maybe, but a big win over Georgia would definitely help propel them to a potential chance at sitting at 10-2 to finish the season. The question is, can the defense get any stops against the Georgia Bulldogs? But last year we did see a tremendous 8-game overtime game here. And if you remember, Haynes King fumbled the ball late in that football game, which would have secured a win if he didn't fumble it, but he fumbled it, went into overtime, and then eight overtimes later, Georgia ends up winning. But the bottom line here for Georgia Tech is they got to get ready to play Georgia, and if they have any chance or any hope of making a potential playoff, beating Georgia is the next step in it. So, again, Pitt, great performance yesterday, 42, Georgia Tech 28, and Pitt keeps their slight playoff hopes alive here. There is a chance that they could get to the ACC championship game. They're going to need some help. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, so we'll see where that goes. Thought 3 on Week 13 in college football. Arch Manning had a heck of a day yesterday, folks. Against Arkansas, the Texas Longhorns beat Arkansas 52-37. Way too many points given up by the Texas defense here as they get ready to go and host Texas A&M next week, which played a nobody and shut them out 48-0. But the bottom line here is Arch Manning, at the end of the day, this was the kind of performance that we thought we might see from Arch all year. He had 389 yards passing. He had 4 TDs throwing the football. He also rushed for a TD and received a TD. So a total of 6 touchdowns in this football game against Arkansas for Arch Manning. This is the kind of performance that a lot of people thought they would see, from him all year, and is finally clicking here at the end of the year. Could it be a little bit too late? We're going to find out. They play, again, Texas A&M next week on Friday night, so it'll be real interesting to see. Could they beat Texas A&M? Could some other things shake up in the playoffs that could get a 9-3 Texas in? I don't know. There is some possibilities, but I'm not sure that that's going to be the case here. So what could we take away from this is that, listen, Arkansas offensively is not a bad football team. They can throw up some points. They just got to get it better defensively for sure. We'll see what happens with the coaching staff down there and where that all leads at to the end of the year. But, again, the kind of performance we thought we might see from Arch Manning throughout the season finally puts it together. Again, a 6-touchdown performance. The defense, again, for Texas still has some work to do, and if they got into the playoff the way they're playing right now, it could be very challenging with this defense. So, overall, an entertaining game. Texas 52, Arkansas 37. Thought 4 on Week 13 in college football. Oh, up in South Bend, we saw an absolutely, it was just a masterpiece of a performance by the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and I'm not so sure I've ever seen a game where it was so dominating on one side, especially in the first half, that the offense didn't even touch the ball until the score was already 21-0. That's right. We had Notre Dame on the first series. Syracuse had the ball. Notre Dame intercepted the pass and picked six that for a 7-0 lead. They kick off to Syracuse. Syracuse goes 3-and-out and punts. Notre Dame takes the punt back to the house for a touchdown. Syracuse then gets the ball back again for the third time in a row, and they throw another pick six, which makes this game 21-0 before Notre Dame's offense even touches the ball. They then hold Syracuse to a 3-and-out, force them to punt. Notre Dame's offense finally trots out on the field, and they ended up with, I think they had a 2-play, 56-yard drive for a touchdown. They ended up punting back to Syracuse for another 3-and-out, and they get the ball back for a 3-play, 65-yard drive. This game is 35-0 in the first quarter, and they ran a total of 5 offensive plays. So absolutely incredible performance on all 3 aspects of the game. Notre Dame only threw for what they throw for in this football game, like 64 total yards in the whole football game, passing the football. Notre Dame. They had a total of 19 total plays in the first half of the game, 39 in the whole entire game, only possessed the ball for 18 minutes and scored 70 points. I mean, this is a kind of performance that's just not seen in the annals of college football very often. Jeremiah Love with a tremendous rushing the football game, 171 yards and 3 TDs in this game. Could, these last 3 or 4 performances that Jeremiah Love has put up over the month of November get him into the top position in the Heisman race? I really do think there's a very good possibility of that here with the way some other players have been playing in the last few weeks. So Jeremiah Love, he's absolutely a chance to win the Heisman here, especially with the performances that he's put up in the last few weeks. So overall, just an absolute shellacking by Notre Dame, 70-7 over the Syracuse Orangemen. And now the real question is, can Notre Dame, obviously they got to play Stanford, who give it up to Stanford, beat Cal yesterday in the big game, so clap it up to them. Told you in week 0, I never wanted to talk about Stanford again, and Stanford ended up putting up a better than expected season here. I think they won 5 games this year, 4 or 5 games this year, which they didn't look like they'd win anything after they went to Hawaii and lost that that first football game was against Hawaii was absolutely terrible. So anyways, congratulations, Stanford. We're talking about Notre Dame, but Notre Dame goes to Stanford. Could Stanford pull an upset next week and knock off Notre Dame? It would be the most Stanford thing to do, but we'll find out here. But Notre Dame looked absolutely dominant. And at the end of the day, I think they're going to be a playoff team, but there's a lot of crazy scenarios here that could ultimately keep them out of the playoffs. We'll find out. All right, so that's it. Notre Dame 70, Syracuse 7. Thought 5 on Week 13 in college football. We got possibilities abound here in the ACC and how this conference is going to shake out and who potentially could make it to the college football playoff. And I'm saying potentially because there is an argument that they may not get a team in at all from the ACC, and it's not that far-fetched. But we're going to talk about what I think could happen that could potentially get Miami into the college football playoff without winning the conference, not getting the conference champion into the ACC, into the playoffs from the ACC. And it's not that far-fetched to believe that this could absolutely happen. And let's break it down. So with Georgia Tech's loss last night to Pitt, that puts Pitt basically in third place in the ACC and how they can get to they'd have to beat Miami, and they need SMU or Virginia to lose next week in order for Pitt to get to the ACC championship game. So if Pitt ends up beating Miami, there's all kinds of crazy possibilities that could happen from there, depending on what Virginia and SMU do. But the most logical thing for this to occur is if Miami goes and beats Pittsburgh next week in Pittsburgh, which is going to be a tough game for Miami, but I think they could absolutely win the football game. Then you got Virginia plays Virginia Tech. I don't remember exactly who SMU plays next week, but it's an extremely winnable football game for them. So we could end up with a Virginia versus SMU ACC championship game here. And if we had Virginia versus SMU, that means we'd have a team at 9-3 playing a team at 10-2. Could we see SMU beat Virginia in the ACC championship game, putting them both at 10-3 for the season, and then Miami would be sitting there at 10-2. Miami will be higher ranked than either Virginia or SMU going into that week, based on the way that the committee's ranking them now. So to me, it almost feels like if SMU beats Virginia and they both finish at 10-3 and Miami's sitting there at 10-2, yes, they have the loss to SMU, who would then have the conference championship, but SMU has the two out-of-conference losses that are playing a factor on this to teams that, quite frankly, they're not super great in where they're sitting now in their conferences. So I think there's a real possibility here that Miami could get into playoffs. The ACC champion doesn't get into playoffs, and two group of 5 teams get in, and that would be James Madison and whoever wins out in the American Conference, especially if it's North Texas and they end up going 12-1. So this whole thing could really shake up to where Miami sneaks in, but the ACC champion doesn't sneak in, and that would be maybe SMU in this case. And now if Virginia wins it, it shakes up things even more. Then the question is how many SEC teams could get into this playoff, and it cuts them down by even more depending on how that all breaks out. But the bottom line here is if they don't put SMU in this year, but remember, they put SMU in last year when they lost a conference championship game, they could come back and say, hey, we gave you one last year, we're taking it away this year and putting Miami in and calling it a day. We'll see what happens. It could really shake up college football and break things up and really cause some problems if this occurs. But there is a better than likely chance that this is how this is going to play out in the ACC, depending on if Miami goes in and beats Pittsburgh next week, and that's the if of all this. So, all right, there we go. ACC definitely has some crazy scenarios that are going to occur potentially, and it'll be fun to watch over the next week to see exactly how this happens. And could a Georgia Tech, who lost yesterday to Pitt, really throw a monkey wrench in to how many teams get in the ACC? Because remember, if they beat Georgia then could they be sitting there at 10-2 with a win over Georgia? Could they get into the playoff without winning the ACC? So there's a lot of things to talk about here, or a lot of things to pay attention to here over the next 4 or 5 days here in college football, because this is already Sunday. So we're talking games are starting on Thursday. We got the Navy game, and then we got Friday's games, and we got Saturday's games, and there's a lot that can shake out in this and really make this interesting as we go into it. So there we go. Quite the craziness happening in the ACC. Quick hitters. All right, let's hit a couple quick hitters real quick. And one of the things that's really for sure now going to happen is it looks like BYU is going to play Texas Tech in the Big 12 championship game. We already saw Texas Tech put a pretty good beating on BYU earlier in the season, just a few weeks ago. BYU secured their situation mostly because they just beat Cincinnati last night, 26-14, in a game that I know Cincinnati really wanted to win because they had lost the week before, and this would have been their only chance to even have a potential chance. Utah ended up winning last night by the skin of their teeth against a pretty average Kansas State team. So we'll see where this all shakes out. But it really looks like it's going to be BYU versus Texas Tech in the Big 12 championship game. Texas Tech, I think, is in this either way. Whatever happens in the Big 12 championship game, I think Texas Tech is pretty secure in being a playoff team because they've already beat by BYU pretty handily. But I think if BYU loses again to Texas Tech in a fashion that it was played out last time, which was a 3+ score game, I think there's a very good possibility that BYU at 10-2 won't get in. Well, at that point, they'd be 11-2. At that point, I don't think they would get into college football playoff, considering where we're at with the 4 or 5 teams potentially in the SEC and what happens in the ACC and these group of 5 schools. There could be only one spot here for the Big 12. So I think if the Big 12 is hoping for something to happen here, that would be for BYU and Texas Tech to play in the championship game and Texas Tech to roll them again by 20 or 30 points. Or this is what I guess the committee would want, would be to roll them by 20 or 30 points and then give the committee an easy out for BYU. Or if I'm the Big 12, then I'm hoping that BYU comes in and beats Texas Tech in a very close game and forces the committee to put 2 teams into playoffs, which will really be challenging considering where we are with some of these other teams and how this is all going to play out. So again, BYU 26, Cincinnati 14, and it looks like we're going to see a BYU versus Texas Tech matchup in the Big 12 championship game. Let's give it up to a couple teams yesterday here. We had Wisconsin get a big win against Illinois, 27-10, and not many people saw this thing coming, folks. Illinois had just got re-ranked back into the college football playoffs last week at 21, sitting at 7-3, I think they were at that point, and they had a real opportunity to go in here, get a win against Wisconsin yesterday and potentially move up the board. Not saying they could have got to the playoffs, but there could have been some craziness that occurred that could have put them close to getting into the playoffs. Probably not, but better than losing to Wisconsin. But instead, they ended up losing to Whiskey on the road, 27-10. And all of a sudden, Luke Fickell's got a little bit something going here. And big win there for Wisconsin. I know that it's almost like the bowl game there for the Wisconsin Badgers this year because they won't be going to a bowl game. And it was their biggest win there against, of the season against a ranked Illinois school. So there you go. Wisconsin gets a big win. Speaking of big wins, Tennessee goes on the road to the Swamp and gets a win there, something they haven't done in 22 years, since 2003. So that's a big, big win. Tennessee's got Vanderbilt next week, and Vanderbilt won and beat Kentucky pretty convincingly yesterday. So Vanderbilt still got playoff hopes alive. Tennessee may think they do, but they don't with the 3 losses. But the bottom line here is Tennessee gets that big win, so they get that off their backs, and now they got to go defend the state of Tennessee from the Commodores and get a win there, and kick Vanderbilt out of the playoff conversation. Because if Vanderbilt beats Tennessee, and Tennessee's sitting out there, 8-4. All of a sudden, Vanderbilt sitting at 10-2 with a potential playoff spot will look real, real bad there in Knoxville, Tennessee. So Tennessee 31, Florida 11. Let's talk about Norman, Oklahoma, and the Sooners invited Missouri in, and then they just beat them around a little bit defensively. Missouri really couldn't move the ball, get anything going against this Oklahoma defense. Oklahoma ends up shutting them down at 17-6. Oklahoma, they didn't need a lot of offense here. They had 276 yards of total offense yesterday. That's all they needed to beat Missouri. This defense is extremely good. They caused 2 turnovers yesterday, forced Missouri into some bad spots, and Missouri just couldn't get anything going and keep this game closer than that. I thought this game was going to be well under the 41.5 that they had it at, and boy, was it. It was only at, 23 points in this football game total. So if you listen to me and bet the under on this, you're a big, big winner. But Oklahoma shuts down Missouri 17-6. And the last thing we're going to discuss here is Ohio State beats Rutgers 42-9. They keep this defense, keeps holding teams under 10 points game after game after game. They're only giving up 6 point something yards or points per game. Pretty impressive overall for this defense. The question about this team right now is, what is going on with these receivers and Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith? And is Carnell Tate really healthy enough to play next week against Michigan? Is this just all been precaution? It's been real quiet, real hush-hush. It's a lower body injury, which we assume is a leg, with the way they're saying it. And Jeremiah Smith, we saw him, get a little bit banged up last week. So was this all precautionary for him? Or, Ryan Day keeps saying it's day by day, but what does that mean exactly? Is day by day mean that their prognosis is going to be good in 5 days? We're going to find out. But, Ohio State, they pretty much went to the running game yesterday and tried to just, bully Rutgers around, a team that gave up 6.5 yards a rush over the season. And Ohio State got to just about that average yesterday at 6.5 yards a rush. So pretty much what we thought they could do to Rutgers, which is run them down their throat, and they did that in the end of the day. So be real interesting this week to keep an eye on Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith and the progress, and how is this all going to play out culminating on Saturday when they head to the big house. Michigan had a big win yesterday against a Maryland team that's not super great, but they went in on the road and took care of business, and without their top 2 running backs, and continued to find another running back to take their place, and did a really good job rushing the football. And Bryce Underwood had some good throws yesterday. So we'll see what happens here coming up on Saturday. But I think Michigan's probably in the best spot of the year going into this game offensively. So we'll see if they can put it together. And Sharon Moore could beat Ohio State for the 5th year in a row. It would be pretty impressive for them. I'm hoping that doesn't happen, but we're going to find out. So there it is. Ohio State 42, Rutgers 9. Well, there's our show for week 13. Again, we got big games coming up this week. We got rivalry week right ahead of us. It's going to be absolutely insanity. Actually, it's not even a rivalry, but it's that Navy-Memphis game is going to take big playoff potential implications. That's on Thursday night. Then we got Friday. We got a big slate of games starting with Ole Miss and Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl, and we got Georgia and Georgia Tech, and then we got Texas and Texas A&M all on Friday. Obviously, Saturday starts off with the Ohio State-Michigan game and ends in the Iron Bowl, so it's going to be an absolutely crazy weekend coming up in college football. We're going to be excited for it, prepared for it. We'll see what happens, but we'll see you next week to review all that. But remember, gather round, in ALTT. We'll see you soon.